Welcome to this week's episode of Listen to Your Coaches. I'm your coach, Mike Wilkins, here with Coach Will Morrill. This week, we're going to talk about some nostalgia for the actually just MMA.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be UFC. We're going to talk about the fighters that we grew up on, all right? So I worded that very specific, all right? So the fighters we grew up on, for us, those are the old school fighters.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, for maybe some of the audience, maybe those are ancient history to you. You've never even heard of them. For some of you, maybe you were in MMA even before us.
Right.
So you'd be like, those guys aren't old school. Old school is...
Keith Hackney.
There it is. There it is. So I'm definitely a generation after that, at least.
We're a couple generations after that.
Yeah. So, that's what we're going to get on to. Another premise of this episode, no prep.
Yes.
No prep was a premise. We want this to go straight off of, like, memory, like, you know, the whole nostalgia vibe.
We discussed this the other day, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll start looking up. And you were like, nope.
I
Zero
was
prep.
like, should we do, like, a top 5? Da, da, da? And I'm like, no, dude. I was like, I just want it to be, like, dudes being dudes.
Yep.
Right? Like, you know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, and, like, you all probably partake in it. But, you know, just, like, a group of your buddies hanging out, and you just name names.
Yep.
It's like, oh, yeah, you remember this guy? Remember that guy? Oh, yeah. Like, oh, remember the 94 Oilers? Yeah. Oh,
You remember when
Moon?
Cordell Stewart was the QB?
Yeah.
You remember Lima Swede?
Yeah. Yeah. So, welcome to it. Welcome into the room of one of those. All right. So,
Let me start it off with a question for you.
please,
Who's your favorite MMA fighter?
George St. Pierre.
Oh, not what I thought you were going to say.
Or you thought I was going to say Frankie Edgar?
Yeah, I did.
Because Frankie Edgar is my favorite MMA fighter to my heart.
Yes.
But, overall wise, George St. Pierre is probably the most, like,
Complete.
complete, like, the person who I look to for, like, a full skill thing.
Right.
If George St. Pierre fought Frankie Edgar, I'd be rooting for Frankie Edgar.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, as far as, like, now, with that being said, my favorite fighters are our fighters.
Yeah.
But yeah,
For the context
for
of
the context
this.
of this, yeah, George St. Pierre, I believe, is, like, probably, like, an idolized one, and then Frankie Edgar was someone who, like, you know, I really attached myself to.
See, what's interesting is, like, and we talk about this a lot, GSP is kind of like that pinnacle. And I think why we talk about him over John Jones, who is objectively, in my opinion, like, the best,
Yeah.
is a number of reasons. One, I think that John has certain physical attributes that, like, us mere mortals can't imagine. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, dude, my arms aren't 7 feet long. I can't imagine.
John has things that are unique to him and are not
Replicable.
Yeah.
Replicated.
Whereas if, like, maybe we had as coaches, maybe if we have a fighter with similar a build,
Yeah.
you know, we could use a model such as that. But GSP is pretty like, you can replicate that.
Yeah, he's a relatively normal body and replicable athleticism.
Yeah.
A lot of it's technique and timing and stuff like that. The other thing I think that we like about George so much is that he faced adversity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, like, you hear arguments both ways where people talk about, like, who the GOAT is and whatever, and they're like, oh, well, John just never lost, and GSP did lose, and then, like, there's people who are like, oh, yeah, but he had to overcome, and, like, you know, I can kind of see it both. Well,
the other way to look at
actually,
the GOAT argument is, so I don't want to get into the GOAT argument today,
Yeah,
but
no,
the
not
way
what
to
this is
look
about.
at it, it's like, so there's two, in my opinion, there's two ways to look at it. You look at the GOAT career or the GOAT fighter. So, for example, John Jones would have the GOAT career, right? Like unbeaten.
Yep.
We're not counting that Matt Hamill for many, many years, reign on top many years, like all that stuff, okay? But maybe, like, let's just say maybe, like, Shogun was actually the best fighter ever, like, but only for those 6 months,
Right.
Like, that 6 month, like, Shogun in March of 2023 or 2013, like, you know, I'm just
Right,
completely making this up, was the best a fighter ever was,
right.
you know, like, type of thing. So it's like, oh, like, the longevity of a career versus, like, at the height of your powers,
Right.
Who's like, you know, like, imagine a Madden rating,
Yeah.
right? Like, the only person to ever be like a 99,
That's
but they only had it
interesting.
for a moment in time.
Because people don't talk about that in GOAT conversations. Is
No,
like,
because GOAT conversation's predominantly about your
career,
which
right.
it should be.
I agree, but it is interesting to talk about, like, on a certain night, there's certain guys where you're like, yeah, no one could ever beat that guy. You know what I mean? And, like,
It's harder to do that in MMA because
Yeah.
there's no season.
right.
You know what I mean? So, like, for example, let's just say, for example, maybe I don't know. Maybe fighter A is actually the best fighter in the world. No one can beat fighter A. All
Right.
right, but he had just got to the UFC. Okay,
Right.
and he has to win like 6 fights to get to a title shot. All right. Oh, maybe Khamzat Chimaev could be this, right?
Oh,
Like,
okay. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
maybe he was the best fighter ever, right? But he was only at the height of those powers for those 2 years, and in those 2 years is what it took to get him
Yeah.
towards the title shot, right?
And
So now
his
he's actually on
the
the
decline.
decline.
Yeah.
Once he gets there. So it's not like, oh man, if he would have had the title in those years, you could have really seen it.
Right.
Whereas in other sports, it's a season. So like, if those 2 years, you would have been the world champion both
Right.
those years. 'Cause if
Right.
you could
Had
beat
you been
everybody,
in that position,
there would have been a tournament
yeah.
that crowns the world champion every year.
That is
so
interesting.
it would have been shown. And then also you can do things with that with wrestling too. Like you have people with like crazy careers, like Mijan Lopez, the Cuban heavyweight Greco-Roman with 5 Olympic gold medals,
Yeah.
right? But then you have people who maybe had like a ridiculously dominant 4 years,
Right. Right.
like type of thing. Like, yeah, it's like, oh well, he has this crazy longevity, but this dude didn't have a. Oh, there's this one Japanese woman, Sasaki.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Up until this Olympics, she never had a match go to the distance.
That's so nuts, dude.
I mean, she either teched or pinned everybody.
That's so nuts.
Could you imagine that?
And it was for a long period of time.
It was like 4 years,
That's so crazy.
and then she lost in the Olympics.
Yeah. She got
Dinesh.
silver, right? It was the
No,
finals.
no,
Oh, it wasn't
she-
the finals.
She took bronze. She took
Oh,
bronze.
I thought it was the finals.
She lost to the Indian woman,
Interesting.
and then the Indian woman didn't make weight for the finals, and then she ended up not getting anything. So how it works in international wrestling, the only way you get to wrestle back for a bronze is if you lose to somebody who made the finals. So let's say I lose to you, and then you lose the next match, I'm out,
Right.
right? But if I lose to you and you make the finals, then I come back and I wrestle everybody you beat.
Right.
Everybody you beat, and the winner. So like we're in our own little tournament,
Yeah.
and the winner of us is the bronze medalist.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, she lost to Vinesh from
Wild.
India.
But
Yeah.
talking about like periods of time, so I think that's kind of the argument people make for like Khabib being the goat. We're talking about goats. That's not what this is about.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So let's just
moments of
jump off.
time, that brings me to my favorite fighter,
Run it.
Anderson Silva, where if you look at his like big run and then you just stop it right there, goat conversation. You know what I mean? I
For
think
sure.
a lot of people don't put him in that conversation because he had like a pretty big decline like that. You know what I
Right,
mean?
yeah.
Which is unfortunate because he's my favorite.
Which is why
He's
I like
who-
to bring up the height of your powers thing.
Right.
Because like, you know what I mean? Like you shouldn't like. It's unfortunate. Like he could have just stopped there.
Right.
But he loves the game.
Sure does.
So he kept it going. Like
And-
Tony Ferguson. Right.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's
One of the
crazy.
most amazing runs ever, and then one of the most amazing declines ever.
Now,
Imagine you just cut it at the end of the run.
how would you compare? And we're kind of off topic here, but how would you compare Anderson's run versus Demetrius's run? Because Demetrius had more, but Anderson's title defenses, I believe, were against harder competition, and during that time, he was bouncing weight classes.
I would have to look at it a little better. He bounced weight classes, with Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner, and James Vick. Or not James
No,
Vick, James.
God,
He
what's
had the
his
bad
name?
boy tattoo with the eyes.
Sandman, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, what's
James
his name?
Irving?
Irving, yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so those were his 3 fights at 205. Forrest Griffin, a champ. So big feather.
Yep.
Big feather in the cap. Demetrius Johnson, a lot of the flyweights, just like also like Anderson Silva was at the middleweight in 205, where those were the premier divisions at that time. So it's also like how much media attention was around it that maybe have made his opponents seem better.
And I think something else that's important about that is, all right, this is actually spot on for our conversation. Speaking of like nostalgia and fights, when I think of a nostalgia in MMA, I think Pride. And Anderson not only fought in Pride and did really well and beat UFC champions there. He knocked out who's the guy who beat Matt Hughes with the slam?
Carlos Newton.
Carlos Newton. He knocked
He
him out
lost
that
to Matt
crazy.
Hughes. He's the
oh,
guy who lost to Matt Hughes.
Oh, he's the one who got slammed. That's right.
Yeah, so the word on that is, so you guys can look it up, old UFC, Matt Hughes versus Carlos Newton. Carlos Newton had Matt Hughes in a triangle. Matt Hughes picked him up in the triangle and set him on the top of the cage. And the word is that Matt Hughes passed out.
Yeah, he went
He got
out and
unconscious. So when they fell, it knocked Carlos Newton out, and Matt
Matt
Hughes
woke up
like
first.
immediately woke up. So they were like,
you won.
"Yeah, you win."
But regardless, Carlos Newton was a UFC champion. Anderson knocked him out brutally. Had a good run in Pride. I think, is that where he knocked out Yushin Okami with that eagle? Doesn't matter.
No, you're not.
That was in the organization that BJ Penn fought.
Yeah, are you talking about when he lost to Yushin Okami?
Yeah, with that illegal kick.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah.
by the way, in my opinion, if you're able to head kick someone when you have them in your guard, bro, let it go, dude. That's insane. The flexibility. He pulled his foot like back to his own head.
Yeah.
Anyways, very old school. But what I'm saying is the fact that he had fought in Pride and then came to the UFC and had this big run. It's like there was no question of like, oh, would he beat the Pride guys? Because then you know what else happened? They brought the Pride champion over and he beat Hendo, who, as we've discussed before, probably the best non-champion in UFC history.
Yeah, we had him at number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say
Or
Anderson.
no, we had him at 1, the best.
Oh, we did have him over. Yeah, we had him over Alistair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, they were the top 2. That's
Yeah.
right.
So like, man, all that stuff. And again, this is my nostalgia speaking about Anderson, but like to me, that's what makes his run just like the GOAT run. Well, I guess John kind of that, but
yeah, but we're nostalgia. John's current.
Yeah,
He's
that's a good
both,
point.
though.
Yeah, he really is.
There goes GOAT step. Look, he's still.
Yes.
Like when that was going down, John Jones was there.
There was a time where I would have argued that Anderson over John, but at this point, it's just you can't.
Yeah, you can't.
But what was cool about Anderson during that run, and one of the things that I think made like that time so special for me, one, getting into MMA, like it's that special time, and also like the way he won fights, dude. Like he would knock people out, and even the fights that like weren't good, like the Talis Leites and Damian Maia. In my mind, the fact that he
Travis
was like,
Lutter.
no, Travis Lutter, he ruined. He finished him. I'm talking about fights where he like kind of clowned someone and like he went 5 rounds. You might be thinking of a different fight. Travis Lutter's the one where he got the triangle elbow finish. You remember that?
No, I just remember Travis Lutter like doing really well, but Travis Lutter missed weight. So
Travis Lutter missed weight, and then man, I barely remember this fight. I think he was doing pretty well, and then Anderson slapped up a triangle. And it's like getting tighter and tighter, and then he just lets go with his arm and it's just like gung, gung, and just elbows his head like 20 times and gets the finish. Yeah.
But he was like losing up until then?
I believe so, but I don't think it was that long. I want to say it was like late first or maybe in the second round or something. I could be totally off on this, but that's what I remember. And like that's kind of like what made Anderson cool. It was like Anderson could be losing and like often would lose the first round. Like not like getting beat up, but just like moving around, feeling things out. And then obviously in the Chael fight, you know what I mean? Like
God.
he's dangerous the whole time. And to me, that's what's like so cool. And the fact that like Anderson just looks like a regular dude. You know what I mean? Like even doing steroids, he just looked like me. You know what I mean? Like just like a tall, skinny guy. And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, for sure. Very influential. I mean, like I wasn't a big Anderson Silva fan, but I was definitely an appreciative of him. I remember I was in Detroit, Michigan, with Cody Hire and Sean Clare, and we were watching the UFC, and it was Anderson Silva versus Rich Franklin 1, and I loved Rich Franklin.
Oh,
and we're there, and I'm like, this dude's gonna beat the shit out of this guy, right? And I was so sure I was talking Rich Franklin up, and then he just got kneed to death.
Dude, also another fun memory of when I did that one time. I believe it was the first fights that were on regular TV. I think it was Strikeforce, when Jake Shields fought Henderson.
Oh yeah.
And I, for whatever reason, didn't really like Jake Shields at the time, and I thought Hendo was awesome.
I thought it was a guarantee because Jake Shields was like a 170, going up to 185,
and Hendo was a 205
and 205 champ.
And he was a great, and like he was an Olympian, and like in my mind there was no way that Henderson wouldn't just walk him. First round he sure does, and then the rest of I think it was a 5-round fight. The next 4 rounds he just died. And I was in college, I was with Joe and Kev. We were in Kevin's dorm room, and we're watching this, and I'm like, guys, I know what I'm talking about. Listen, this Henderson dude, he's going to crush him. First 5 minutes, I'm like, yeah, dude. Like, I know what I'm talking about. And then the next 20 minutes, I'm just like, yeah, so about that.
Crazy. Yeah.
Now, when you think of nostalgic fighters, because when we first brought this up,
I just like the fighters I grew up on. So here goes. Like I was first introduced to MMA in seventh grade. My wrestling coach, Coach Laddick, he was also my gym teacher, and we were in our health block. So we did like the first. So we had 6 grading periods, like 6 weeks, right? I know a lot of people do like 4 9 weeks or whatever. We did 6 6. So the first third of the year was like gym. The second third of the year was health, and the third of the year was swimming.
yeah,
Right? Because that way you'd hit all 3 throughout the year. And we had health, so in the middle of the year, which was classroom based, which was so lame, But when it's classroom based and it's Christmas time, the last day before break,
you're doing nothing.
Work, throw a movie on. He would throw the UFC on.
That's
and
so
we'd
sick.
be like, "Whoa, dude, it was so sick." So that's what first got me into it, and like I learned about Hoist Gracie and stuff like that. But I didn't like stay into it,
Right.
I didn't stay in. I would catch some stuff here and there, but I would say like it was after high school that I got into it, and the fighters that I was first introduced to after high school was like Chuck Liddell, Rich Franklin, some people that they were fighting at these moments. Like Chuck Liddell was fighting Vernon White.
Yep.
Rich
Bob
Franklin,
Ballou,
yeah,
Tito,
all those fights.
Randy,
Rich Franklin was fought
Nate
Evan
Corey.
Tanner.
I think Evan Tanner, yeah.
I think he won the title off of Evan Tanner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he defended against Nate Quarry, and he
knocked him out horribly.
Like stoned him, knocked him out, and all that stuff. And then I started getting into like George St. Pierre and BJ Penn.
Yeah.
And I was always a George St. Pierre fan. I'd say the first fight I watched George St. Pierre actual like pay-per-view maybe was like the Jason Mayhem Miller fight.
That's pretty early.
I think it was UFC 52.
Okay, dude. You just brought up a number of things that sparked so many memories. One, when you were talking about like someone at a certain time could be the best like ever. BJ had a very short time where he might have been like the best, what I mean? Like just period, That's interesting. Also, Mayhem, that's someone I'd forgotten about to a good degree, and someone that I feel like a lot of people nowadays don't really know that much about. Because he didn't really have like a big UFC career. I think he had 2-3 fights in the UFC, I think.
I'm not even sure.
And I think he lost them all. But Mayhem was a legitimately good fighter, and he was known in Japan for having these crazy shows. You know what I mean? Like crazy walkouts and stuff. And then obviously Bully Beatdown. And then I think he had a kind of bad decline.
Yeah, but he's like back.
Really?
He had like a whole like mental, maybe drug fueled thing.
Yeah. That's kind of what the last I remember.
Yeah. He's. I've been keeping up with him. He's back.
He's back?
Yeah. I think he's like coaching.
Oh, good for him. But I remember he was like huge outside of the UFC, even like back in those times. And I remember thinking like, wow, this dude's really good.
When he weighed in at the weigh-ins for his fight against George St. Pierre, the 170-pound limit, he stepped on the scale. He missed weight. Right.
I was gonna say, how do you ever make 70?
Well, he missed weight. This was on purpose. So he missed weight, right? He's on the scale, missed weight. He's like, oh, and you know how like maybe pull the towel out. He had a grill, and he pulled his grill out, and then he made weight. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
So like he like had it.
Yeah, he had it right on.
Yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that like
he
Mayhem was known for. And Mayhem too, like he was like a legitimately good fighter. He fought a lot of really good dudes. He fought Tim Kennedy. He beat Sakuraba.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, nostalgic times. That's what I want to get into is when you first brought up, like we're going to discuss nostalgic fighters, there were 2 things I went to. It was one, the fighters that I like grew up with, right? Which is all the guys you're talking about, those early UFC, or not early, but like for us, the early UFC stuff, especially Chuck and Anderson. Those were like the big ones for me. But then the other thing I think of nostalgia is the generation just before that in Pride and like earlier UFC that I only saw highlights of, and like
you didn't see him live,
right? So like Wanderlei and Vitor, like fights like that.
Wanderlei, Vitor, Shogun. I'm
the
trying to think
freak
of like
show
all the
stuff
Pride.
in Pride.
Stuff.
Dude,
Like all the
Big
Fedor
Nog,
stuff, Kevin
Fedor,
Randleman.
Big Nog, Kevin Randleman.
Here we go, doing what the episode asked us to, just name
Just spit
names.
names, dude. Hungman Choi, Giant Silva, like just
Yeah,
weird stuff, like Bob Sapp. You know what I
yeah.
mean, dude? Bob Sapp and
Um,
O'Gara. Oh, Don
Ricardo
Fry
Arona.
and Taka.
Yeah, where they just held each other's heads.
Yeah, dude.
No, not no gear. Ricardo Arona.
Oh my God, yes, dude. On the receiving end of the craziest slam of all time.
Yeah, the Rampage Slam.
Yeah, and that's what's nuts to me is that like okay, so like there were a lot of guys that I was really into who were like generation crossing. They were in that what I think of as nostalgia right before I got into it, into when I first started getting into it, and those dudes were like the first legends to me. That's the Rampages, the Fedors, the Big Nogs. You know what I mean? And then you see kind of like the next generation of guys who like started to take over. Like to me, Frank Mir when he broke Big Nog's arm, he was Tom Aspinall. You know what I mean? Like I was like, this dude can do it all, you know? And then it's crazy because if you look at that Frank Mir versus Tom Aspinall now, like
Well, here's the thing with Frank Mir too. Like when I got into it, it was like Frank Mir and Andre Arlovsky. Right?
yeah, dude.
Frank Mir was the champ, and he was in the motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
Then Andre Arlovsky came and became like the guy who fought like Paul Buentello.
And Sylvia, Tim Sylvia.
Yeah, Tim Sylvia. Yeah, all those dudes. And then Randy came in and like beat Tim Sylvia.
Dude, I
Low
remember
kick overhand.
one of those early like embedded type deals. It was about Andre Arlovsky, and I remember them showing his team, and he had a head coach, he had a strength and conditioning coach, like a striking coach, a wrestling coach, jiu-jitsu, and they all would like sit down at like a board meeting and like took a very professional approach to it. And I remember this just blowing my young mind and being like, oh my God, like they're taking this seriously and like treating it like a real sport when all these other guys are just kind of like messing around. And I remember at that moment being like, Andre with the fangs,
Yeah.
like he's unbeatable. No one will ever beat that guy. You know what I mean? And then like
I remember him whooping up on Fedor
until the
until he
flying
threw
knee.
the flying knee and Fedor.
Every
knocked him
time
out
I
of the
teach
earth.
flying knees, I always talk about that because I put it in the fundamentals curriculum. Like there's a flying knee. Sometimes I teach different ones, but like there's a flying knee in that curriculum. And I was talking about like guys, there's a high risk, high reward. I was like, you know, Andre Arlovsky was beating up Fedor, which was great. And like again,
You're
understand
saying that, and they don't know nothing. They're like, "Who are either?"
and the
of these
more
dudes?
I teach and the more time goes on, the more my like examples get outdated. And it's crazy is there's a lot of stuff that happened while I was teaching, and I'll be like, yeah, this is a current example of it, and then time keeps passing, and like I'm like, yeah, I'm still using my current example, and I'm like, oh no, that's pretty old too. But Fedor Arlovsky, like I think is the perfect example of that, and again, no one knows who it is, and also people don't realize how crazy it was that Andre was whooping on Fedor because
Dude, it was crazy.
up till that
Dude,
time,
first off, the promotion, it was in Affliction.
yeah, dude. Most people are like Affliction.
What's
I mean,
that?
those like
Is that old
those
clothing
crappy
brand?
T-shirts
Yeah,
that like
and
you
it's
guys thought was
well,
cool? Kind of.
kinda.
But also there was like a TV show and like a legit promotion that I think did like 2 shows or something.
I think the third got canceled because something happened with the main event.
Yeah, like Fedor negotiator. I don't know, something happened.
Yeah.
But Andre whooping on him, and then he decides to go for that flying knee and gets knocked out midair.
Yeah.
Perfect example of why high risk, high reward, and you got to set those things up. And why Fedor is just like, dude, you can make some Fedor arguments for being the GOAT over a certain time span. You know what I mean? Had he have gone to the UFC and had even some success, bro, if he would have, let's put it this way, if he would have won a UFC championship, I think that people would, even if he just got it and lost it or retired or whatever, I think he would widely be considered the heavyweight GOAT.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I still kind of consider him that, but I think a lot of, especially more modern fans, don't.
Well, I mean, like, then he did go and lose to a middleweight.
That's true. That's true.
The same middleweight who lost to a welterweight.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, yeah, there's these levels to it. Yeah. So I think like some of like the big moments for me. So like after I got through that first like little like stint of it, I was really into George St. Pierre. As I was saying, my first fight was UFC 52 with him, Jason Mayhem Miller. I remember, if I remember correctly, he made his debut at UFC 46 GSP. Now this is pre.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and he fought Pete Spratt. Does that sound right?
Wow.
Nope.
Yeah.
He fought Carl Parisian. He fought Pete Spratt outside of the UFC.
Wait, I didn't know he fought Kara.
Fought Carl Parisian. It was his UFC debut at UFC 46, and then at UFC 48 he fought Jay Huron, and then at UFC 50 he fought Matt Hughes for the title. and he got armbarred with 1 second left in the first round.
Right.
He took Matt Hughes down.
Yeah.
And then Matt Hughes ended up taking him down later. And then GSP went for a Kimura from bottom side. And Matt Hughes stepped around the head, straight armbar, tapped with 1 second to go in the first round. And then his first fight back from the title fight loss was Jason Mayhem Miller at UFC 52. Because he fought every other UFC for the first ones. Which, like, seems like crazy, but, like, you got to understand, like, that was every, like, 5 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so.
Now, okay, do you have, and I have, like, you saying these names reminded me of some stuff. Do you have any, like, fights that you remember as being wild? And now I'm thinking about it. I don't want to even say this because people are going to go back and look it up and maybe it's not that crazy. I only remember watching it in the moment. But a fight that people don't talk about that you thought was wild?
No, I have fights that people talk about that I think were wild.
Okay, let me start with one that people don't talk about. Akiyama against Chris Levin.
I remember them fighting, but I don't like.
I all I remember was while I was watching it, and like for the weeks after, and people didn't talk about it as much as I thought they should, being like, this was a wildly good fight. And now I don't even remember how it ended. I want to say Akiyama triangled him, but it was like real back and forth and like very Chris Levin style. Yeah. You know what I mean? But like, the reason I hesitated in the middle of that is because just knowing the level of MMA back then, maybe me watching that. Okay, here's a good example of one that was talked about as a good fight that I did not think was a great fight. The Korean Zombie against Garcia. What's his name? You know who I'm talking about, right?
He was Cowboy's boy.
Yeah.
Leonard Garcia.
And it was just a crazy slugfest, which like, cool, I guess. But like, I remember watching the time being like, it's just like not a lot of technique here. And like, if you want to see guys slug, like there's fights where that happens, like whatever. But dude, okay, now that I've said it, I have to go back and watch that fight, Akiyama and Levin, and see if it actually was good.
I would say like Frankie Edgar, Gray Maynard, the title fights.
Yeah,
those were wild.
Those were nuts.
I do remember I was like I switched over to being a big BJ Penn fan. You know, like during like basically like his title run, pretty much. Before he lost it, like I was a big BJ Penn fan. And one of the things I liked about him was that he was lazy.
Yeah, he was like, known for that.
He's like, so they're like, this dude's lazy, like, and it was just like so, like he's naturally gifted, and like I thought that was so cool. And then he had a fight. So he previously had a fight with George St. Pierre at like UFC 60 something, right? So like back in the day, up at 170. And BJ Penn walked George in the first round, and then George won the next 2 rounds, and he ended up winning the fight. Right? But George looked all messed up, and BJ didn't. But, like, George won the fight. And so BJ's on this title run, and he's like, I'm going to go up and beat George St. Pierre, so he's going to move up to try to be a double champ.
And BJ was the first ever double champ, right?
I don't think so. I think Randy Couture.
Really? That was before that? Interesting.
Well, like, so here goes the thing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, we should look it up, but I'm pretty sure Randy Couture was the first double champ because he was like the heavyweight champ, like before BJ.
I thought, didn't he get his heavyweight championship against Tim Sylvia, right?
Again, I believe
he was heavyweight champ before that.
Yeah, he beat Vitor Belfort for the heavyweight title.
Oh, that's right, man.
Or was that light heavyweight?
No, I think that was heavyweight.
Because I think it was like 240.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he was the 205-pound champ, like when he was like going back and forth with Chuck
him and Chuck and Tito. That was a great like, rivalry.
And I think that all happened before BJ won the 155-pound belt.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because BJ didn't win the 155-pound belt until like Sean Shirk. That's who he beat for the 155-pound belt.
Yeah. Oh.
Because he fought for it against Jens Pulver and lost.
Dude. You know, you just unlocked a memory. You know who a fighter who, like, kind of around this time, maybe slightly after, who I thought was really good and didn't really get his due praises? Evan Dunham.
Oh, Evan Dunham was good as heck. I remember Evan Dunham. Dude, I was really into him.
Yeah.
He was, like, well-rounded.
Yeah, he was well-rounded. He was tall, but, like, still thick.
Yeah, bald head, like, skinny white kid.
And he, if I remember correctly, he fought Sean Shirk, and I thought he won.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was cool.
Well, Frankie's big moment was beating Sean Shirk.
Right.
Because they were going to send Frankie to the WEC because Zuffa had bought the WEC and 25, 35, and 45 were only in the WEC, which we should talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, dude.
Because I was big in the WEC
Me
because
too.
I was at this time I started fighting and I was fighting a 145. So like in my head, like I'm going to the, like I didn't think like I'm going to be in the UFC. I thought I'm going to be in the WEC
Right.
because I was a 45er.
And the WC, they just had incredible fights, dude.
Yeah.
Incredible fights. Do you remember the last card where they were when Zuffa bought them, but it was still
Yeah.
WC, and they brought Rogan and Goldberg in to
Yeah,
announce
no, I
it?
don't remember that, but
Oh, it was a great card.
was that the Showtime kick, and didn't Dominic Cruz defend on that as well?
I don't remember. I just remember
Because I
that card
remember
being insane.
when they came over, there wasn't even 25s. Were there 25s in the WC? I don't think so.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Wait,
Oh no, yeah, there was because that's where Uncle Creepy fought, right?
I think he fought 35.
Oh yeah, because did he
I think
fight
those
Cruz?
were 35s because 25s because 35 and 45, Cruz and Aldo came over as champs.
That's right. And then
So
they
they
had to
got their
have the
UFC
25. That's
And
right.
then they had the 25 tournament with Uncle Creepy,
Demetrius.
DJ, Joseph Benavidez,
Yes.
and
Who else was that?
whoever Joseph beat in the other side.
I can't remember.
What I can't remember right now either. But whatever. So there was that. I was a big BJ fan through that, and then he was jumping up to fight George St. Pierre, which, we already talked about. It'd be a rematch or whatever. And they did like a UFC like countdown, like a multi-episode one.
Right.
And it switched me. And I always liked George St. Pierre, but at this moment, I wanted BJ to
Right.
win.
Yeah.
Right? And the countdown show, which was a multi-episode one, it was like,
Right.
like they like many, like a couple, like an episode would drop every week up until the fight. And I switched to George St. Pierre because like BJ Penn was like taking vacations, and George St. Pierre was just like
Disciplined.
disciplining, and
Technique focused.
and it just switched me.
Yeah.
Like watching it, I was like,
Do you remember seeing that video? I remember being like, a younger lad. I was a kid and seeing the video of BJ jumping out of the pool.
Yeah.
And being like, best athlete ever.
yeah, I remember that.
And just being like, oh, and he just relies on this, and he's known for being lazy, but like it just doesn't matter.
So BJ Penn, now this could be changed, but at that point in time, he had the greatest reaction time too. George St. Pierre, one of his like people did a study on BJ Penn where they frame by frame broke it down, like every UFC fighter, like some dude went nuts for it.
Yeah.
Every UFC fighter, and BJ Penn's reaction time was significantly better than
Yeah.
everybody's.
Yeah.
Right? Like the punch starts coming out, and like how quickly he would react to it and stuff. So like they trained for that.
Also, didn't BJ get his black belt in 4 years?
Yeah, and he won worlds. He's a world champion.
That's so nuts.
Yeah, the
So nuts.
Mundials. Yeah.
Dude, you know what I'm really excited for is when they start. Have you ever seen like, on wherever they'll have like best of this decade, and it'll be like the 90s and 2000s, and you'll watch it and you'll see all the music and the trends and the fashion and whatever from like when we were kids, and you're like, oh, that's pumps that nostalgia. Dude, I can't wait for the UFC to be like best of, this era, however they want to break it up by like, I would say era is probably going like, what would you say, 4 or 5 year chunks?
Yeah, probably, but they'll probably do it like in decades because it's just like easier to like put the timeline on it. Like, I'm trying to think of like moments that really like define the generations of the UFC. So there was the no weight class tournament generation. Then they got into like the actual fight cards, right? So that's like
Frank Shamrock, Tito, when Tito
and then there
really...
were weight classes,
Yeah.
right? And then the next generation of it, I would say, was when they added the like what would be like the current weight classes, like 70,
Right.
85, 205, and heavyweight.
Yep, and unified rules and everything.
Unified roles.
And that's when guys started to, or it might be a generation after actually, where guys really started to like know everything. Actually, there was kind of a generation. Do you remember the Jake Ellenbergers and the who was the other wrestler?
Rick Story.
Rick Story.
Charlie
Guys like
Brenneman.
that. Yeah, were less him too. Whatever.
Well,
but
Charlie
like,
Brenneman beat Rick Story.
yeah, but what I'm saying is like guys who kind of like they're fairly complete. They're good at all these different things. You know what I mean? And like the Rory McDonald's, guys who came up doing MMA, not something, and then they transferred. You know what I mean? And I think that you might kind of consider the changing of a generation. You know what I mean?
And then there's like pivotal moments, like okay, like when USADA came, when Reebok showed up, right,
dude,
like so those are like landmark.
Wow,
periods.
dude, we should really, man, maybe maybe one day when we get like, that spare couple of weeks that we've been talking about forever, we should just sit down and make our own version of it with highlights and timelines and stuff. That'd be a sick little documentary.
That would be sick.
Or maybe someone else can just make it and we can watch it.
Yeah, that'd be tight too. I'd like that. Yeah. So, who do you think was the most influential fighter on your like path into MMA?
Into
Anderson?
MMA?
Yeah.
Or like during, it's got to be Anderson.
Anderson.
Yeah. What Anderson was to me was a relatively complete fighter, despite the fact that his wrestling was kind of lacking, but his jiu-jitsu was so good. He had a skill differential to where his jiu-jitsu could out class wrestlers, what I mean?
For sure.
And it also, what I thought was so cool about him, and the same reason I kind of like Carlos Condit so much, is that like, especially the early days, is it wasn't the position first, which obviously we teach to all of our fighters type of deal. It was offense first, which I thought was so cool. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you're taking me down? Cool. I'll fight off my back. Oh, we're standing? Cool. We'll fight here and I'll have my hands down. Like, and I just thought it was all so cool, and obviously that won't work in modern MMA.
Right.
But yeah, dude, super influential.
Dude, okay, so I'm glad you said that won't work in modern MMA. So that's a huge selling point for George St. Pierre.
Yes.
George St. Pierre, so it's timeless.
Yeah, dude.
His style is still available to this era.
And the things he did, like, were elite for that time and for this time. So, for example, using pace as a weapon. Like, a lot of people think of that as, like, being, like, more of a modern thing, even though it's not. But, like, that's kind of thought of as a modern thing. GSP could, speeding up or slowing it down, use pace and didn't overcommit too much and didn't, you know what I mean? Like, he did all of that well. He wrestled well. He could strike well. The other thing that people don't talk about enough with George and with Anderson is elite chin. And, like, you shouldn't be known for having a good chin because that means you're probably not a great fighter, but you need to have a great chin in order to be a great fighter because you will get cracked. It's just part of it. Do you remember Carlos Condit head kicking GSP? Mm-hmm. I was like, it's over.
GSP was only knocked down twice and only knocked out once.
Right.
And when he was knocked out, he wasn't unconscious. He
tapped. Yeah. But like I remember Condit hitting him with that, and I was like, it's all over. The GSP train is no more. And then he just came.
You know what's crazy is like it is inarguable that GSP, like even people who are like, oh, this person's the GOAT, this person's the GOAT. It is inarguable that GSP is one of the greatest. No one can argue against that.
I think if you go Mount Rushmore, so our top 4.
Yeah.
I don't see any argument with him not being top 4.
Okay, well even this, like if you say, like if you broke it down to like top 20.
Yeah.
Like there's nobody in the world who would not have him at the top 20 and not being like, oh, I can't believe I forgot about him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like he's an all-time great. GSP is inarguably an all-time great. No one's gonna be like, he's not an all-time great.
Honestly, I would have real issues with someone not putting him in top 10.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm just saying, like, just to like really
right. Yeah. There's nobody.
And he tapped to strikes.
Yeah, I remember he got a lot of flack for that, especially like with like the super broy tough guy.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just like, dude, like one of the greats of all time tapped to strikes, right? Like, it's like
against the guy who was 5'6".
It's more important to like like if it, especially where you are in your career and like what defining moments you're in. You're already a champ. Like you're gonna get another shot. Like to like save yourself.
Yeah.
From like career-ending damage,
dude. And he was one of the first guys to really get into like prehab style exercises, a lot of like gymnastic stuff, joint strengthening type of stuff. You know what I mean? And again, I remember seeing that like as a very like young guy and being influenced by that, and like that's a massive approach to how I look at martial arts. Whereas like, kind of the world I come from, like traditional martial arts, was very much just like, oh, technique's all that matters. Like, we teach you kids how to do a front kick, and now you could beat up like any boxer. You know what I mean? Just like nonsense. And then like Bruce Lee and GSP and like this kind of stuff like really made me realize like, oh no, strength and conditioning matters a lot. You know? So yeah, dude, it's so influential and so like you said, timeless. He really has a timeless style.
He's timeless. Like you can model your game after GSP right now, and you're gonna be good.
Of our nostalgic eras, okay, so we'll break it down into 2, right? The just before us and like us coming up, right? So like the Pride times and like kind of mid UFC era. Is GSP the most timeless of all of those? Is there anyone else from those times that you think could compete now with their skill set?
Just GSP.
I think Fedor could compete, but I don't think he could beat like the Aspinalls.
Why? Because he would have to compete at 205, and then I don't know if he has the athleticism for the. So here goes Fedor. I think like doesn't have the athleticism for a modern 205, and he doesn't have the size for a modern heavyweight.
Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I was going to agree with you on that. I actually do think he had the athleticism for a modern 205.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I
I don't.
I think okay. Well, just think about who are like the best 205ers now, right? We have Poatan.
Yeah.
We have Jiri. I think he could take both of them
Jamal
down.
Hill.
I think Jamal Hill he could outstrike. And Jamal Hill I consider like a very athletic striker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe he could have. Maybe his style could have. I don't know. He's a maybe though. But
GSP is a certainty.
I can't think of anyone else who.
It's a certainty, and here goes how I know it's a certainty. On a past episode, we recapped UFC 306, and we just talked about how Shevchenko modeled GSP.
Yeah, yeah.
Boom. It's a certainty that it can be. You can
Still
fight
use
like
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think fighting as efficiently as possible is ever going to be a bad idea.
But 100%. But like, what was efficient at one time, strategy wise? Like, for example, when you were in guard back in the day, it didn't always make sense to stand up. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
If you had like a halfway decent triangle, and you thought that your guy had he's gonna get it once every 10 minutes or so. You know what I mean? Like. Yeah. Or he has a whatever percentage rate of finishing a triangle. You might be like, hey, it's okay to stay in guard. Let's start slinging this up. Maybe Tony Ferguson hucking elbows off the bottom, whatever. Boss rooting off his back. There was a time where the strategy was different. You know what I mean? And I don't think that GSP's style ever isn't a good strategy. Takedowns, top control, solid, efficient striking. You know what I mean? Like, when does that not? How could that change? Now watch us in 10 years be like, the game is so different. But
no, I don't think so though. I think in 10 years, like the game will be different, but I think it's just the ingredients, right? Like, so if you look at the techniques as like ingredients, it's just the ingredients on the sandwich. You're still making a sandwich.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So like, he efficiently did it with Superman punches and like different
low kicks,
high-low
feints,
jabs, feints and stuff. And like, so so now maybe those tools become outdated in a way, potentially, but like it's the concept of the efficiency and safety, and,
right?
Playing the percentages.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
yeah,
like that can't go out of style.
Putting your opponent where they're weak.
Yeah,
that's
just all.
Just principle wise, can't ever not be the case.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was a good trip down memory lane. Hope you guys enjoyed. Maybe we'll do like a part 2 or something later, get a little bit more specific, but it was a good one, and we'll catch you guys next time.